5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live as Lichtman Live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Hey, sad day. Another mass shooting. More children dead. We mourn for them. But there are things we can do, but we're not doing them. We'll have a lot more to say about that tonight.
Okay, let's get into our first topic, which is the Minneapolis Catholic school shooting. A former student opened fire during Mass at a Minneapolis Catholic school, killing 2 children and injuring dozens. The FBI is now investigating it as a domestic terrorist act and anti-Catholic hate crime.
All right, I have a number for you, Sam. Are you ready?
Yes.
286. 286. Do you know what that number is?
The amount of mass shootings this year?
The number of mass shootings this year, according to the Gun Violence Archive. A mass shooting is a shooting that either wounds or kills 4 or more persons. 286 mass shootings, and we're not even finished with the month of August. That's more than 1 mass shooting per day. And there could well be 286 different motivations for those shootings. The truth is, we have no idea why someone decides to take one of these deadly weapons, often an assault weapon that has no purpose other than to kill people quickly and efficiently, and open fire and wreak deadly violence upon others. There's no single common denominator that one runs through these 286 mass shooters. You know, you can investigate all you want. You can try to develop motives all you want. It's all irrelevant. There is only one common denominator. And what is that, Sam?
Guns.
Guns. And that is what differentiates us from every other peer nation in the world. Our 286 mass shootings are more than our 35 closest peer developed nations combined. I repeat that. More than 35 developed peer nations combined. You know, to listen to the gun lobby, the gun manufacturers, you would think our loose gun laws, which at the federal level are almost non-existent, should make us the safest country in the world. And in fact, it's just the opposite. Can you put up that first chart with the dots on it? Not
the
this
dots,
one.
okay.
Yeah. What does that show, Sam?
We're a big outlier up here at the top.
An enormous outlier. Not by just, you know, a few percentage points, but, you know, multiple times. And this is per 100,000 people. So it adjusts for population. It's an equal measure. And you could see the 35 other developed nations are clustered way down by the 0 to 0.5 level. And there we are, over 4 per 100,000. What makes us different from those countries, Sam?
Second Amendment?
Guns.
Right.
We'll get into the Second Amendment in a moment, but guns.
But there's none of these countries have any sort of like constitutional guarantee to guns like we do.
No. And that's the greatest hoax that has ever been pulled off on the American people.
The Second Amendment, you're saying?
Not the Second Amendment per se, but the notion that the Second Amendment establishes an individual right to keep and bear arms, as opposed to the keeping and bearing arms for the purposes of a well-regulated militia, which is part of the Second Amendment. It's not just the second part. The two are tied together. And there is no question that the framers of the amendment, that those who voted for it in the Congress, who ratified it in the states, had no intention, not the slightest intention, of establishing an individual right to keep and bear arms separate from a well-regulated militia. Not a single person of the many thousands involved in drafting, passing the amendment in Congress, or ratify it in the states, and I repeat, not a single person ever said that this amendment establishes an individual right for American residents to keep and bear arms. All the debates that have been recorded, not every debate was recorded back then, talk about who should be exempted from the militia. You know, should Quakers and others of certain pacifist religions be exempted? There was no talk whatsoever, no debate about an individual right to keep and bear arms. But here's the clincher, Sam. I think we've talked about this before. Who drafted the Second Amendment, do you know?
A lot of slave owners.
A slave owner, James Madison.
Oh, specifically one slave owner.
One slave owner.
Okay.
Hundreds of slave owners in the Congress and in all of the state ratifying conventions all voted for the amendment. Do you think for one moment, one split second, that these slave owners, who were deathly afraid of black people, whether slave or free, by the way, do you think for one moment they would have drafted, passed, and ratified an amendment that gave free black people an unlimited right to keep and bear arms? Not a chance. But by tying it to a well-regulated militia, they kept guns out of the hands of black people. Do you know why, Sam?
They were scared?
No, they were barred from the militia. Black people could not serve in the militia. So by tying the keeping and bearing arms to the militia, not to the individual, they achieved their goal of keeping arms out of the hands of black people and making it an exclusively white possession.
Right.
And you know who recognized this until the late 20th century? The National Rifle Association. In my book, Repeal the Second Amendment, Case for a Safer America, wow, you have it. You got everything going, don't you, Sam? I point out that a memo from the NRA as recently as 1955 recognized that the Second Amendment does not establish an individual right to keep and bear arms, and that our gun advocacy cannot be based on the Second Amendment. Then you got a big political change in the NRA in 1977, the so-called revolt in Cincinnati, when extreme advocates of gun rights tied to the gun lobby, the gun manufacturers, took over the NRA. And not based on any scholarship or anything, but just to promote the availability of guns, they organized and orchestrated the greatest fraud in American history. All of these works, not by historians, but by lawyers with ties to the gun lobby and the gun industry, the NRA for the most part, to perpetrate the falsehood that the Second Amendment protected an individual right to keep and bear arms. Even the late, great, very conservative Chief Justice Warren Burger recognized what a fraud this was on the American people. And then in 2010, you had the Supreme Court, led by Justice Antonin Scalia, the greatest proponent, supposedly, of original intent of the Constitution, to establish for the first time that the Second Amendment protected an individual right to keep and bear arms, and that could be a club against even reasonable gun regulations, although he did leave a little bit of a loophole open. And again, he's supposed to be an originalist, supposed to be based upon the understanding of the amendment as it was adopted at the time, and he could not cite a single person involved, as I said, in drafting, passing, or ratifying the amendment that supported his position that it protected an individual right to keep and bear arms. And even conservative, strict constructionists, including the great Circuit Judge Posner, the most cited legal scholar of the 20th century, have excoriated Scalia, saying, you did not stick to your philosophy of original intent and strict construction. Instead, you read your own politics on guns into the Constitution, and that's what we are living with now. Look at that chart. Set up the next one. This is the number of public mass shootings.
Shooters, it says.
It's astonishing per 10 million people. So again, it's graded to the population, and you can see our rate, again, is multiple times that of any other area of the world, including unstable areas like Africa and South America. You know, we are supposed to be the safest nation in the world. We're supposed to be a beacon for the world. If you listen to all the propaganda from the NRA and the American right, and the data just proves the exact opposite. And luckily, a lot of this data is produced by independent, nonpartisan, private organizations, so Trump can't fire them and put in his own loyalists to cook the numbers in his favor, as he is trying to do with the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Defense Intelligence Agency, where he fired the head of that agency because they contradicted, based on intelligence, not on bluster, his claim that they had obliterated Iran's capacity to produce a nuclear weapon. These numbers should absolutely shock you. They are just astonishing. Put up that Onion quote. The Onion is a satiric magazine, and it really says it all. The Onion on mass shootings, quote, "No way to prevent this," says the only nation where they regularly happens. Obviously, the rest of the world, particularly our peer-developed nations, have found ways to stop this. It's only epidemic in the United States with its loosest gun laws and greatest availability of guns. All these other nations have the same problems we do. They have drug problems. They have gang problems. They have problems of poverty. The only fundamental difference is how they deal with their guns. So we had this horrific but hardly surprising school shooting recently. And you know what Trump's response was?
No.
I'm going to pray for them, right? Yeah, this guy who's virtually never seen the inside of a church, held a Bible upside down for his photo op, couldn't come up with a single Bible passage. He's praying for them. But it's not Trump. Ever since mass shootings, particularly school shootings, and they're not limited to that, were seared into the American conscience with the mass killings at Columbine High School in 1999. The response of American conservatives, Sam, has been thoughts and prayers. And even Carolyn Leavitt today in her press conference blasted the Democrats for criticizing this. Oh, you can't denigrate the power of prayer. How many lives have those thoughts and prayers saved since 1999, Sam?
I don't know.
Zero.
Possible question to answer.
Zero, obviously. And they haven't brought back a single life. I'd like you to put up the long quote. Yeah, there it is. This is a mass killer mocking this idea that the response should be thoughts and prayers and not real action, not actually doing something to deter and prevent mass shootings. And I'll talk about other kinds of gun killings as well in a moment. This is so laughable that a mass killer was able to mock it. This is David Long, a gunman who killed 12 people in 2018, and he wrote this manifesto.
You shouldn't say his name.
I shouldn't?
I don't think so.
No, I think he's dead.
Well,
so.
I'm just saying, you shouldn't say killer's name.
But these names are all, I'm not revealing anything. They're
I'm not saying,
over.
I'm just saying the principle of it.
Fair
Whatever.
enough.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, you kind of threw me off
you're
there.
fine. You're fine.
Quote, "It's too bad I won't get to see all the illogical and pathetic reasons people will put in my mouth as to why I did it. Fact is, I had no reason to do it, and I just thought life is boring, so why not?" My point, you're never going to get at the real motivations, and it may be 286 different motivations. But here's the real crusher here. Quote, "I hope people call me insane." 2 smiley face emojis. "Wouldn't that be just a big ball of irony? Yeah, I'm insane. But the only thing you people do after these shootings is, quote, hopes and prayers, or, quote, keep you in my thoughts every time and wonder why these things keep happening." 2 smiley face emojis. Horrific, but it really speaks for itself and just exposes the enormous hypocrisy of those enthralled to the NRA and the gun lobby. Final point before we go on, Sam. Mass shootings are the tip of the iceberg of gun violence in America. About 15,000 gun homicides. Many gun suicides, gun deaths, well over 20,000 a year in the United States. Again, we have no comparability with our peer-developed democracies. I looked at our closest peers, the other nations in the G7 group of nations and Australia. And get this, Sam, an American per capita is 20 times more likely to be murdered by a gun than a resident of our closest peer nations. Not 20%, 20 times more likely to be murdered by a gun. And as I've said, these nations also have problems of mental health, of poverty, of gangs, of drugs. The only fundamental difference is gun laws and the availability of guns. And, every time there's a prominent mass shooter, the media can't even cover them all because there's more than one a day. Thoughts and prayers, or we get the other deflection. Oh, this isn't the time, in the midst of the tragedy. Been hearing that since Columbine 26 years ago. If not now, I ask the nation, then when? If not us, then who? Okay, thanks for that, Dad. You ready to move on to the next topic? Yeah, I'm so sad. Yeah, me too. CDC Director Susan Monarez, was fired for refusing to support RFK Jr.'s vaccine policy changes, claiming RFK Jr. weaponized public health and is sparking mass resignations among agency scientists. Jim O'Neill has been tapped as the acting CDC director. O'Neill is a Silicon Valley-based technology and biotech investor with close connections to billionaire Peter Thiel. You hold this for a second. Public health is so important in this country. As I get older, I realize just how important is the old saying, if you don't have your health, not a whole lot else really matters. That is the basis of a decent life. And RFK Jr. is destroying, and I use that word advisedly, destroying our public health system with his reliance on quack science. And again, I use that word advisedly. It is quack science that he is promoting. And that's why, even legitimate scientists who are not, lunatic liberals like Menares. I believe she was appointed by Trump himself. She's an infectious disease researcher. She's not a partisan on one side or the other, but she recognizes what scientists have established for God knows more than a century, the incredible value of vaccines. 3 things are really responsible for raising life expectancy from, the 30s in the 19th century to the 70s today. Modern sanitation, antibiotics, and vaccines. And RFK Jr. is, in his quack science, is spreading the worst kinds of myths about vaccines. We saw its effect in Samoa. Dozens of deaths when he came and cast doubt on vaccines in this little tiny place. It would have projected to hundreds of thousands of deaths in the U.S. No, vaccines do not cause autism, as the quack scientists claim. This has been studied time and time again. And now he's acting to make it more difficult for us to get vaccinated. And it's not just the rules and regulations, Sam. It's the atmosphere he creates. It's the casting doubt on vaccines, which has the multiplier effect. When even if you can get a vaccine, when you're not barred from it, you're going to be much more reluctant to do so. And of course, not only when she was fired, other critical professional personnel also left. And a number of experts in public health are warning that the CDC is in disarray, and it may take months or even years before we could possibly repair it. One of the professionals who left said, "I am not able to serve in this role any longer." He wasn't fired, Dr. Dashkalikis. He was left because of what RFK is doing. "I am not able to serve in this role any longer because of the ongoing weaponization of public health." There is now a dark cloud over the agency and our profession. This is a distinguished scientist whose work has helped the nation deal with previous pandemics. Dr. Mandy Cohen, a former official of the CDC, said, "The weakening of the CDC leaves us less safe and more vulnerable as a country." A former deputy director of the CDC said, "I think we should all be scared about the nation's health security." Donald Trump claims to be a populist, claims to be for ordinary Jane and John Doe, and what he's doing to public health, it's not going to hurt billionaires like him, but what he's doing to public health, what he's doing to Medicaid, food stamps, and yes, to Medicare, making it more difficult to get care under Medicare. Who is it going to hurt? The ordinary, average Americans that he claims to stand for.
Can I ask you a question? How do you feel about all of these people resigning? Because, in normal times, I agree that's, it might put pressure on an administration, etc. But Trump and them, they don't care if people, in fact, they probably love it that people are resigning. So you've
probably
got
so,
all these great people, scientists, researchers, whatever, resigning, and either their jobs will never be filled under the Trump administration, or they'll fill them with these quacks and hacks.
It's, it's Hobson's choice.
Yeah. I mean, I get where they're coming from. I wouldn't want to serve a government that was doing this kind of stuff. But at the same time, it's like, we need these people to be there. I don't know.
It's two bad choices, really. As I said, that's what Hobson's choice is all about. And it's an age-old dilemma. As old as history. Do you try to work from within inside of an evil regime to try to change it and reform it and do as best you can? Or do you resign and protest and try to do what you can from the outside. But I guess what these people, it was not just kind of a decision in terms of which best serves the nation working from inside or outside, but I have to believe that under RFK and his promotion of quack science, they just found their positions untenable, that they could not practice the best practices with this guy at their head. And by the way, this should come as no surprise. And, you know, this is why I was so flabbergasted about what happened in the last election. We exactly knew who RFK was. We exactly knew what he was going to do to our public health. And yet, you know, we went ahead and elected Donald Trump, who we knew was going to put this guy in charge of our national health apparatus. His own family said he was manifestly unqualified. They called him a predator. And yet, you know, somehow we didn't believe this was going to happen. And we're now all paying a very heavy price.
But I blame the senators mostly, because the senators could have stopped him in his tracks.
You know, I've made this point before.
Right. But I'm saying the voters...
They're complicit. Yeah. That's the point.
No, I'm not saying they're complicit. I'm saying they're the reason why he is the head of HHS. They could have stopped him. They could have stopped him, and they didn't.
Right, but he was appointed by Trump.
True.
It's not as if Trump is, innocent in this.
Right.
And they're all complicit. You know, I've made this point so many times that the commentators are way off base in saying the Senate caves to Trump because they're afraid of him. That may be a bit part of it. But they cave to Trump because they agree with him. They are just like Trump, steeped in this MAGA ideology, the notion of these, you know, middle-of-the-road, mainstream Republicans. They don't exist anymore.
What do you think about this guy who's now the acting director, Jim O'Neill? He's got no...
He's some tech billionaire?
Yeah, he's a technology and biotech investor. And now he's head of the CDC. No medical experience, no public health experience at all.
It's just shocking, but not. Right. I mean, as I've said before, Trump claims, you know, no more DEI, no more diversity, equity, and inclusion. Everything I do is going to be based on merit. Is that true, Sam?
Obviously not.
He has scoured the country to find the least meritorious people possible for top jobs, including RFK Jr. himself, and the poster child for this, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense.
And, you know, Trump, for a long time, was successful in his messaging of calling D.C. the swamp, et cetera, et cetera. He is making D.C. as swampy as humanly possible. This guy, Jim O'Neill, is a big rich guy from Silicon Valley, you know, with connections to Peter Thiel. He's put so many rich, powerful men into these positions that they, like you said, are not qualified for, making D.C. as swampy as it's ever been.
I don't know if you saw the clips of his cabinet meeting, all of these white faces. I think, you know, there may be 2 or 3 Hispanics, and I think 1 black person in his entire cabinet.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. But my point is not. It's not even about race. It's also
partly about race,
of course. But I'm saying my point is that he is notorious for calling DC swampy and corrupt, right. And he's making it 10 times worse, but just putting essentially an oligarchy into place in DC, and a loyalist. Whoever's the most loyal and whoever's the richest gets these positions essentially.
Right.
Jim O'Neill has no experience in this. He has this role for the only reasons why is because he's rich and powerful. He has good connections to rich people. And
no qualifications to be head of the CDC.
That's my point.
Exactly. You're 100% right. You know, to the extent, you know, the bureaucracy needed some reform, as you say. Not only hasn't Trump initiated any reforms, he has made things, and I think 10 times worse may be an understatement. You can't overstate how much worse he has made the swamp in our government.
Right. Again, I just don't get how people buy into his bullshit.
It baffles me. It really does.
You ready for our next topic?
Yes.
Some good news for Democrats. Iowa Democrats celebrated a rare victory, flipping a Senate seat and ending the GOP supermajority, but Republicans still remain confident heading into 2026.
Yeah, this was a huge win in an Iowa Senate race. This was a district that Trump had won by about 11 percentage points. Not only did the Democratic flip it, it wasn't an eyelash election. She won by 10 points. So you're talking about a 20 percentage point, not percentage point turnabout between Trump's victory there and the Democrats' victory. It's got to be a very good sign for Democrats. I always go with actual election results, rather than poll numbers. But Democrats did well in the midterm elections, or the special elections before the 2024 elections, and it didn't presage a very good general election for Democrats. So Democrats cannot afford to be complacent. They seem to have some glimmer of developing a spine, some glimmer of stopping to play, not to lose, and going on the offensive. They've got to keep that up. They can't presume that wins in off-year or special elections are necessarily going to carry them to victory in 2026, particularly given all of Trump's attacks on free and fair elections.
That's what you got for that one?
Oh, I got plenty more, but it's getting late, and we have some others to go.
Are you just drinking plain ice
water? How about that?
I don't know if I've ever seen that in my life.
Yeah.
Are you okay?
It shows even at my age you can change.
Oh. Thank you, Krasimir Boyana, for your membership gifts.
Oh, we really, really appreciate that, yes.
All right, our final topic before we head into questions. Excuse me. Fed Governor Lisa Cook filed a lawsuit against Trump over her firing, arguing he violated for-cause protections. A judge is already reviewing the case in what could become a landmark defense of Fed independence.
Yes. Now, let me give you a little history on the Fed. The Fed went into effect under Woodrow Wilson in 1914. It was one of the first of many reforms adopted under President Wilson. Wilson, controversial figure. He's certainly very racist, but he also began the turnaround of the Democratic Party. In the 19th century, under presidents like Andrew Jackson and Grover Cleveland, Democratic Party was a party of limited government, hard money, and states' rights. Woodrow Wilson began turning that around and introducing the modern Democratic Party, which abandons the idea that the federal government has to defer in every case to the states and can't act. He began actions by the federal government in the interests of the American people, something that, of course, Franklin Roosevelt would later greatly expand on. And some of the first things he did was reduce tariffs, so Americans wouldn't be suffering high prices, established regulatory agencies to control the power of the enormous trusts that were developing big business at the time, and establish the Federal Reserve Board because there was no means of controlling financial panics that had periodically hit the country to that point. And the Fed also, for the first time, was an organization designed to promote American prosperity, keeping inflation down, but at the same time, keeping the economy moving enough to create good jobs. A very delicate and difficult balance. And because the Fed had to deal with a delicate and difficult balance, and because it was so important to the economic health of the nation, they established it advisedly to be independent of politicians to whatever extent you could. And that's why they had lengthy terms, 14-year terms for governors, of the Federal Reserve Board and specifically wrote into the legislation that governors could only be fired for cause. You could not just fire them like you might some other political appointee. To allow that would be to destroy the independence of the Fed and upset its ability to maintain that delicate balance between inflation and growth. We've seen examples before of how political interference with central banks have undermined the economy. Richard Nixon pressured Arthur Burns, a rather partisan head of the Federal Reserve, to pump up the economy prior to his 1972 reelection. It worked then and then introduced 10 years of economic pain. I think I'd mentioned last time what happened in Turkey when they interfered with the central bank. Inflation went up to 80% and the value of the Turkish currency plummeted. So there's good reason not to interfere with the Fed and to take very seriously the idea that they could be fired only for cause. Well, her lawsuit, of course, emphasizes the need for the independence of the Fed. And for those, conservatives on the courts who believe in the intent of the framers of law and the plain meaning at the time, that should be a very, very powerful argument. But her second argument is, of course, that they did not have legitimate cause. First of all, this occurred before she was on the Fed, had nothing to do with the carrying out of her duties. And secondly, nothing's proven. This is an allegation coming from a Trump loyalist himself and then seized upon by Trump as grounds for firing. If this is allowed, then any loyalist to a president can gin up any accusation against literally, in this any member of any regulatory agency, since the Fed is the most protected, and then the president can use that allegation, even if it's not been proven, to fire the person. We cannot allow that to happen. And let me emphasize, there has been no wrongdoing proven. Has she been convicted, Sam?
No.
Has she even been indicted for anything?
No.
No. What we have is an unproven allegation by a very self-interested party within the government. So this is a incredibly important lawsuit that has ramifications way beyond the Fed. And, if she loses this lawsuit, that'll go a long way to validating what Trump has said many times, that as president, I can go ahead and do whatever I want.
All right. Let's get into some questions before we do that. Don't forget to like the stream. It helps us a lot. We have 760 people watching, but only 300 likes. Make sure you like the stream. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. Click that notification bell so you know we're live. And remember, members and donations get priority on questions.
Yes, we need those members and donations.
Our first question is from Toyota Corolla. They say, "Hi, Professor. As a firearm enthusiast, it's frustrating trying to talk to my friends about any form of gun control since they think that any law means Obama literally coming in and taking it. How would you talk about the issue to them?"
Yeah, I would refer you to my book, Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America, in which I make the very strong point that reasonable gun controls, things like waiting periods, background checks, controls on gun shows, safety requirements, gun permits, in no way, shape, or form involve the confiscation of guns. Even liberal justices would not countenance any idea of seizing people's guns, and advocates of gun control don't even come close to proposing that. All of these common sense regulations will still allow people, if they need it, to have guns for legitimate self-defense, for sport, for target practice, and hunting. This is another propaganda perpetrated by the gun manufacturers, the gun sellers, and the gun lobby to scare you, to keep us from doing the right thing.
This is from James LaGruta. They say, unfortunately, I'm not holding my breath anytime soon on effective gun violence prevention legislation. Conservative Catholics and evangelicals alike are focusing on the Minneapolis shooter being transgender, but not the weapon. As a Catholic under religious vows, I'm once again flabbergasted that pro-life groups don't focus on guns being the number one cause of death of children. I know you wrote 2 books about this, but can you briefly explain why these pro-life groups seem to work against any form of gun safety measures?
It really is astounding to me. You know, the Christian right continues to flabbergast me. You know, they focus on the most fringe elements of Christian or Christian Judeo teaching, you know, deviant sexuality, transgender, abortion, and miss the vast bulk of Judeo-Christian teachings, which focuses on the dangers of greed and wealth, focuses on the value of telling the truth, of caring for the poor, the vulnerable, and the sojourner. The only thing I can say is the leadership of these groups is not being dictated by religious teachings, but by their own political priorities and their own pocketbooks, by what they are promoting. And this other idea that seems to be perpetrating among Christian conservatives, which I also flabbergasts me, this notion we have a God-given right for self-defense, and somehow that translates into unlimited access for guns, which all the data, and I've just shown you the tip of the iceberg here. Read my book. It's filled with data. All the data shows the looser the gun control laws, the more deadly the violence. It does not make you safer. It makes you much less safe. Even within the U.S., even though we don't have strong national laws, just look at the state laws. States with the strongest gun laws have the lowest rates of gun violence. States with the loosest laws have the highest rates.
Which gun policy do you prefer? Castle doctrine / stand your ground or duty to retreat?
Yeah, I talk about this in my book, and I look at the data, and the data shows that castle doctrine, stand your ground, is associated with higher rates of homicide, particularly of gun homicide, and is also very, very biased racially. I think that is a very misguided policy, both philosophically and in terms of its actual effects. You know, we have this myth that most gun deaths are, you know, these hardened criminals bursting into your home and shooting you up. Is that true, Sam?
No.
No. Most gun deaths are from people you know. And in particular, probably the plurality, I mean, the majority of gun deaths are to arguments gone bad and escalate to gun violence.
What do you know about world leaders canceling visits with Trump and refusing to answer phone calls?
I'm not necessarily aware of that, but if it's true, it wouldn't surprise me one bit. He's obviously antagonized world leaders with his tariff wars, unwanted tariff wars, including for some of our closest allies in Europe and Canada. And they're also worried about his tilt towards dictators. You know, his pumping up of bloody, murderous dictators like Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un of North Korea. And they're very worried that he's weakened the Western alliance that has kept democracies, for the most part, safe since the end of World War II. That's the history behind it.
Professor, what is your opinion of Trump threatening Soros and his son with RICO charges? He's part of Trump's... Here is part of Trump's Truth Social post. Quote, George Soros and his wonderful radical left son should be charged with RICO because of their support of violent protests, and much more all throughout the United States of America.
There are several points to be made here. First, what does Trump claim to be defending against when he goes after colleges and universities and other cultural institutions? Anti-Semitism. And yet he is one of the worst anti-Semites of any leader we've ever seen, certainly the worst of any modern president. This is a guy who said, there are fine people among those chanting, the Jews will not replace us. Who said, if I lose the election, I'm going to blame the Jews. Who said, if you don't support my buddy Netanyahu, you're a bad Jew. Yes, Rabbi Donald Trump, I'm glad you're telling me how I am not a good Jew. And some of his worst anti-Semitism comes with his vicious, unfounded, contrary to evidence attacks on this Jewish Holocaust survivor, George Soros. He even blamed George Soros for his convictions in New York, not by George Soros, but by a jury of ordinary people, claiming George Soros had bought and sold the prosecutor, the black prosecutor, one of the worst old anti-Semitic racist memes we've had in this country, the idea that unscrupulous Jews are manipulating docile black people to war against good white Christian Americans. And it's not just Trump. If you check my book, Conservative at the Core, which is coming out next week, Sam.
Oh, wow.
I have example after example of Republicans blaming George Soros for starting bloody riots, for even paying black people to start a race war. What could be more anti-Semitic than that? And again, all of this is utterly baseless, utterly fabricated, totally defamatory, although obviously you can't sue the President of the United States. Second thing that I want to point out here is this is another example of Donald Trump going after his political enemies. George Soros does fund Democrats and liberal organizations, as is his perfect right in our democracy. And yet, like other so-called political enemies, like the Attorney General in New York, or Senator Adam Schiff, or former special counsel Jack Smith, Trump fabricates, makes up out of whole cloth, charges to level against his political enemies.
It seems like now every day, Republicans, whenever they face any pushback from protesters or demonstrators, they just always say, oh, it's just paid protesters, it's just paid demonstrators. It's just their way to...
And they're all violent and murderous.
Right. It's just their way to obfuscate any sort of accountability. Accountability used to be part of a high moral character, but I guess not anymore.
Look at Ron Johnson's conservative principles. Look at the Heritage Foundation's True North of Conservative Principles. The principles by the great godfather of conservatism, Russell Kirk. They all emphasize personal morality and responsibility. Out the window.
This is a $20 donation from Russ Knott.
Thank you.
They say, longtime supporter, what can Dems do to increase voter registration? Have they given up on the working class and care too much about the donor class? Is there a way for them to get back the support they have lost?
We've been talking about that a lot. It's a very smart commentary. Absolutely, they should be looking to the worker class. And a twofold strategy. Of course, talk about the way Trump is decimating the well-being of average Americans, and then what Democrats have to offer to make their life better. I've said this before. If you look at virtually every initiative of the past 100 years that have helped ordinary Americans have come from Democrats. The insuring of our bank deposits, more guaranteed mortgage loans, Social Security, workmen's compensation, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, aid to education, the Affordable Care Act. They've all come from Democrats. The only thing I can think of this 100 years that's remotely comparable to these 10 or 12 things Democrats have done would be the Americans with Disability Act under President H.W. Bush, but a lot of conservative Republicans were against it.
This is from 2009 KY Gal. They say, I'm concerned about how the district maps look for Dems by 2032. I heard some people speak on how the maps will be so tight then. It'll be pretty much impossible for Dems to win. How come this is likely? If the Dems win in 26, can they meet this head on?
They've got to. And, I'm not sure how you would get it through the Senate, even if the Democrats had a bare majority, because it would be filibustered. We need national anti-gerrymandering laws. We need to pass the John Lewis election bill, which would facilitate and make easier the opportunities to vote. These are critical elements, but given implacable Republican opposition to anything like that, it's going to be very, very difficult. So what Democrats need to do is fight fire with fire. We talked about this a lot. If Republicans are going to gerrymander, unfortunately, Democrats have to respond. They just can't bend over, while at the same time working for national anti-gerrymandering legislation. And the biggest problem is whether or not we're going to have free and fair elections. And I've talked about ways to prepare for that. We need to start preparing right now, working with Democratic governors and legislatures in swing states to get ready for what could be an onslaught on the next election.
Thank you to WrestleMania for a $50 donation. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
You recently said that you're against expanding the size of the House of Representatives. Why is that? Among other things, I feel like it would significantly limit the amount of gerrymandering that happens.
That's a good point. I'm against it because I think it's so big already to be incredibly unwieldy. But, hey, you make a good point. If we could expand the size of the House in a way that it would make gerrymandering more difficult. I'm not sure it's true. I'd have to look into that. The devil is in the details. But that's a good point to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. This is from Obi Family. They say, hi, guys. Greetings from Sydney. I heard recently that Trump has plans to host a UFC fight on the White House lawn next year. Surely this kind of Romanesque insanity might be enough to finally prompt a welfare check on the president. Or do we wait until Democrats are being forced to fight each other with fountain pens on the floor of Congress? This person's funny.
He's very funny. Of course, the old saying, if you can't give them anything that really benefits them, give them bread and circuses, right?
Right.
Keep them in check. And this is all part of it. Plus, this is Trump's glorification of violence. He loves violence. He talks about knocking the hell out of people. He posts violent videos of his political opponents. This is integral to Donald Trump. So it's not surprising that he loves the most violent of sports.
I want to push back a little bit on the violence thing as a person who does practice martial arts and is a fan of the UFC. The UFC is violent and fighting combat sports are violent, but it really is an art form. And yes, it is about damaging your opponent who is another human being, but
there are lots of other art forms that don't damage people.
Of course, but I'm just saying that I don't agree with this. I don't think there should be a UFC fight. I think that's the issue, is that it makes it a circus. It dumbs it down, and I think that...
And does seem to glorify violence.
Right.
I don't think too many people watching it are going to be watching it because of the intricate martial art techniques. They're watching it for the mayhem.
I don't know. That's just generalization that I'm not sure you can prove.
Well, look at the audience for UFC compared to the audience, say, for jiu-jitsu matches, which is almost zero.
Fair. I agree that UFC definitely has a level of violence that a lot of martial arts don't rise to. And yes, I agree that it is a spectacle. It is.
And do you think for 1 second Trump loves USC because of the intricacies of the artistry?
Probably not.
Yeah, probably not.
I'm not defending Trump here. I'm just defending
your point
mixed
is a good
martial
one,
arts.
but still, it's a pretty horrible thing.
Thank you, John Roberts, for 5 gifted memberships. Appreciate that.
Awesome.
We got about 5 minutes left.
All right, I can take maybe 3 more questions.
3 more questions. Professor, recently Steve Miller has been branding the Democratic Party as the party of terrorists and gang supporters.
I thought they were the party of pedophiles.
Now they're the
party of terrorists. Yeah, boy, they must be able to turn on a dime and totally change their identity.
Is this terrorist branding not a way to designate Dems as a terrorist organization? Close party operations to achieve single party rule. The designation criteria is also simple, and Marco Rubio, Pam Bondi, and Patel will do that for Trump. What do you think?
It terrifies me.
Really? You think?
Yeah.
I don't know. That seems a little far-fetched to me.
You know, every time I think something is a bridge too far, Trump crosses it.
Yeah.
So I put nothing past him. I guess it's more convenient to call them terrorists than to call them pedophiles, since you can have, designate an organization as a terrorist organization, in which case, they're going to lose their rights and be subject to arrest and detention. Would not, again, unlikely, but every time I think this can't happen, somehow it happens.
Speaking of talking about crazy things Trumps are doing, you were interviewed on News Nation last night, and this partisan hack journalist there was trying to argue that what Trump's doing is the exact same of what every president has ever done, and you did a masterful job of proving him wrong. If you guys haven't seen, I don't know if it's online or you had to catch it live. I doubt they'll post it because
they're not going to.
You schooled that guy so badly. You know what I thought was the funniest
part? I got a bunch of emails and phone calls about it.
Yeah.
Usually I get this hate stuff, but I got accolades for that performance.
It's funny. I was listening to it. I didn't see it, but I was listening to it, and he started his segment playing all these clips of quote unquote mainstream media, exaggerating all these things Trump is doing and how their coverage is biased. And at one point, when you were debating him, you were saying, talk about biased coverage, because he's cherry picking all this stuff and picking out these obscure one-off examples, et cetera, et cetera. And you said, talk about biased coverage, and he went, no sir, no sir. And you could just hear it in his voice, like, oh my God, he called me out for being biased.
Right.
He found me out. Anyways.
Yeah, it was absurd. He pointed to things like Biden's student loan program, Obama joining the Paris Accord, working the Iran nuclear accord, as if those were comparable to what Trump is doing. It's just, and I quoted Trump as saying, I can do anything I want. So he says, oh, Obama said the same thing, and he quotes Obama saying something like, I have executive orders and can use them. Nothing close to, I can do anything I want.
It seems to be this very common pattern for right-wing media folks to just flood people with false equivalencies, and flood them so much with false equivalencies, I guess people just start believing them to be totally equivalent when, again, they're not at all.
Not even close. It's the big lie again. Say it often enough and loudly enough. And, I couldn't go through every single one of his examples, but I thought I closed really strong. So he says, look, Franklin Roosevelt detained Japanese Americans, and yet the left lionizes him. And I said, no, the left does not lionize him for turning the Japanese Americans. The left and Democrats roundly criticize him for that, and a Democratic Congress apologized and established reparations for those who are interned. That was sort of the end of it.
Is it possible to separate Mao, the revolutionary, from Mao, the dictator?
Of course. One of the things about revolutionaries who become dictators, like Mao or like the leaders of early Soviet Union, the revolutionary ideals are very appealing. A lot of Americans look to Mao as kind of an inspirational figure. And then the problem is power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And once they gain into power, it's a very, very different matter. That's why it's so important to maintain a tolerant and pluralist society and not become entrapped in any one given ideology.
Are you familiar with the Reagan's Mulford Act?
I am not. Do you know what that is? Can you look it up?
Look it up. Reagan's.
Sounds like some baking of muffins. I may know it by another name, too.
The Mulford Act, signed into law by California Governor Ronald Reagan.
Oh, it's Governor Reagan.
Yeah, in 1967, prohibited the public carrying of loaded firearms without a permit.
Yes, I am familiar with that. And a couple of things that,
and guess what it was in response to?
Yeah.
The Black Panthers.
Yes, exactly. But, Reagan, Reagan supported gun control, although perhaps for the wrong reasons. And he also had a liberal abortion policy as well as governor of California. So people point to those two things. Yes, I am familiar with that. I just didn't realize it was called the Muffin Act.
It wasn't called the Muffin Act.
No, it wasn't called the Muffin Act.
It was called the Milford Act.
Yes.
All right. With that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live for the evening. Again, thank you to Russell. I think I called him Russell Mania. I think it's Russell Mama for a $50 donation. Yes?
Westy Mama. Yes.
Oh, Westy Mama.
Westy Mama.
My dyslexia is going crazy right now. Westy Mama, thank you for your $50 donation. Thank you to Beth Brown, Jules Are Forever, and Axel Moreno. Appreciate you. The Daniel, I think, also donated. Yes, thank you to all you who donated who didn't get on air. The good news is the Lichtman Live post show is coming up right after this.
That's awesome. And the other good news is my book will be out next week. You can pre-order it and get it hot off the press, or order it once it comes out on September 1.
I just flipped to a random page and we'll start reading it. You ready?
I'm ready.
The rise of religious activism. I can't speak. The rise of religious activism among conservatives in the early 20th century coincided with three critical developments. First, millions of Catholics and Jewish immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe arrived in the U.S., challenging the homogeny of native white Protestants. Second, religious modernists grounded in evolutionary theory began to take hold within many mainstream Protestant denominations. For religious conservatives, evolution contradicted the book of Genesis, conflated humans with beasts, and cast doubt on humanity's immortal soul.
Wow. Pretty damn good, right? Back then it was, the Jews and the Catholics from Italy and Russia. Now it's God knows who, the Muslims, the Africans, you name it. There's always an other to attack.
Mexicans.
It's too darn easy.
Central Americans.
Americans, you name it. There's always someone.
All right, Dad. What are your final words to the people tonight?
My heart grieves for the families and loved ones of the victims in Minneapolis. But grieving, thoughts and prayers is not enough. We know what we need to do. We just need to somehow overcome political interests and do the right thing.
All right. Thank you, Dad. Say good night, everyone.
Good night. See you on Tuesday.